Good evening. This is Maestro Critello with the Dawn of War 2 Retribution Elite Modcast. Today, we have a 1v1 on Fedrid Folly. Yeah, that's what this map is called. Now, our first player is Tex, playing as the Commissar Lord. The Commissar Lord is a slightly tanky melee hero. He does have that energy shield, and you do use him in a lot of the ways that you would use any other tanky melee hero. He just doesn't have quite as many hit points as those heroes, even with his free energy shield compared to how tanky the other heroes can become, but he still can be pretty beastly in melee. He can also execute his troops to make them fight harder. It gives them a 100% damage buff. He's also got that crazy ability later on, Emperor's Wrath, which turns him into a manticore. Tex's opponent is NoisyElmo, playing as the Orc Warboss. The Warboss is a full-on tanky melee hero, can definitely become ridiculously tanky with certain upgrades later on. He starts out with a twin-link shooter, a chain axe. He can tie things up pretty well, he can charge, he can stomp to disrupt. He's also got those Warboss globals, use your choppers, and Ard boys, which are pretty critical because they're so good for winning engagements. Now, this is a matchup that I would think of as favoring the Orcs. As with a lot of Imperial Guard matchups, I see it as being pretty tough. And especially this matchup, I'm not entirely sure how Imperial Guard players do it. What I think is especially tough about this matchup is keeping your Sentinels alive against the amazing amounts of range fire that comes out of the Orc opening, especially with the double shooter boys that are fully upgraded. Here we actually have triple shooter boys, and if we see upgrades on this, it's going to be incredibly hard to micro the Sentinel in order to keep it alive. Normally, 2 shooter boys are tough enough for a Sentinel, especially because Orc players will usually fully upgrade their shooter boys in this matchup. They'll get big shooters, as well as the shooter knob. It's just a lot of range fire. It's hard to keep the Sentinel alive, and even if you can keep the Sentinel alive, it's hard to really achieve much with the Sentinel because it needs to retreat so quickly once it starts facing the shooter boys. Now, the Sentinel can definitely bleed models off of the shooter boys, especially if they don't have their knob leader. They're they're actually pretty squishy, and the Sentinel can definitely bleed some models, but still has to be very, very careful. And overall, I just find this a little tough on the Imperial Guard side of the matchup. And, I mean, right here we see how much the Warboss is doing. I always say that one of the big things about the Warboss is just his ability to push forward. He's been really just pushing forward. Tex is kind of off the field, and that's another thing that's can be tough about, ooh, but he actually managed to kill the Warboss. Can be tough about playing Imperial Guard, especially when you're new to it. A lot of the times it feels like you're just constantly backpedaling, having to give up ground, usually trying to move back your Sentinels while trying to reposition your Guardsmen so that they can repair them. And I think that could be especially true against the Warboss. The Warboss, on the other hand, is a hero who's great for pushing forward, great for being aggressive, since he's a tanky single entity and he's supported by a lot of high damage range fire in the form of shooter boys. So I think this heavy weapon team purchase is nice for that. It's going to be helpful for controlling the Warboss. I think setup teams in general are very, very useful, if not necessary, against the Warboss. Otherwise, I think it can be pretty hard to deal with him. Guardsmen here actually nearly getting wiped because we had Ludas that were infiltrated. That is, of course, a unique ability that the Ludas have compared to all the other setup teams. They can just infiltrate and then kind of come out as a surprise. But I noticed Tex in particular likes to get these heavy weapon teams when playing Imperial Guard. And I think it's hard to generalize. Certainly with the Sorcerer, he's a player who definitely stresses control a lot, although that in part has to do with the Sorcerer. But, I mean, that might just be part of Tex in general. Looks like the Warboss has been revived. We've got some pretty long tier 1s from both of these players, relatively long. Generally a 5 squad, or, well, in this case we also have Sentinels, but a 5 unit build, and I say units in addition to the hero, is usually considered slightly extended. 6 would be very big, and 4 is more like the standard. I'd say, I don't know, maybe 4 or 5 is standard these days. 3 is definitely short. I would still say 4 is standard, and 4 squads, or also Sentinels, is standard, while 5 is slightly extended. Although in the case of Imperial Guard, they can certainly manage getting their... I feel like a lot of their units in Tier 1 are cheaper, and I'm saying this kind of in comparison to, say, Space Marines or Chaos, where they've got those units like Tax and Chaos Space Marines, which cost a bit more, or even some of the Tier 1.5 units that cost power, things like Assault Marines can be pretty costly. In this case, in Imperial Guard case, we've got units that are relatively cheap coming out on the field, and that is one of the ways you can get more units, by getting cheaper units. And usually even extended builds with other races like Chaos and Space Marine, usually getting extended builds with them usually involves getting cheaper units, like getting more Scouts or more Heretics. Or in this case, in Noisy's case, more Shooter Boys, more Daka. He actually has one squad that still does not have their big shooters, but he's actually kind of low on resources as far as what he can upgrade with. This is kind of a bad position for the Sentinel. Very risky. I mean, you just really got to respect that shooter fire. It's as much as they can bleed models off these shooter boys. It's such a much bigger loss to lose a Sentinel entirely than it is to lose individual shooter models. And if we look at the VPs, I mean, this is actually part of the way Noisy is controlling things, and I think this has a lot to do with not just Noisy in particular, but the hero that he's playing, who he's good at map control in the sense that he's good at pushing forward, pushing off his opponents, and winning engagements, and then just taking the map because he forces his opponent off the field. I think with Imperial Guard, map control can also be a little bit tough in the early game as well. I'm not sure what players say about Imperial Guard map control overall, but one of the things that Imperial Guard has is that they have these Tier 1 vehicles, the Sentinel, and that actually, I think, hurts their map control a little bit. Despite the fact that Sentinels are faster, they're speed 8, so they can actually do some map control things that other races can't, but they create they have the synergy with Guardsmen, which is both synergy as well as dependency. They need the Guardsmen there. Not only do they benefit from the Guardsmen, but they kind of need the Guardsmen there. I think especially against a race like Orcs that have so much early range fire, they really need to be able to get those repairs as soon as possible. Like, just as soon as they start taking damage, you really need to back them up and start getting repairs, because without repairs, they might even just die trying to back up. Now, Noisy has a suppression team of his own, and that's also something that might be part of what's giving Noisy this edge that he's having, that he's able to push forward and hold his ground so well, because the Luda suppression teams in general are pretty good against Imperial Guard, especially if you don't get artillery spotters. Tex has chosen not to get artillery spotters, and it's possible to deal with setup teams without artillery spotters, but it's very tough. Pretty much the other answer is a dual Sentinel build, and that's a lot harder to use than an artillery spotter. And I think, like, the players who we see who are actually proficient with this dual Sentinel thing are... The obvious example is Toy Lali, he had to deal with suppression teams and such, like, before Elite Mod even came out, because he was the best Imperial Guard player before Elite Mod even came out. So he was using dual Sentinels as a way of dealing with suppression teams, even with players trying to get double or even triple suppression teams against them. Tex, not exactly an Imperial Guard player, he kind of plays a bit of everything, but he's definitely a very well-practiced player prior to Elite Mod, so it wouldn't surprise me if he's pretty proficient in the dual Sentinel play. He's actually upgrading both of them to the missile launcher. One of them does not even have the stomp. The missile launcher is pretty nice, especially with its recent buff, but I think this would actually help him a bit against the shooter boys, because he can, like, just shoot a volley and then back off. The missile launchers just work very, very differently compared to the starting multi-laser. They kind of do a lot of damage just in that single volley, in that burst, whereas the multi-laser is, like, just very steady DPS over time, and the DPS on the multi-laser Sentinel is pretty low, whereas you just really get a lot more bang, like, just out of one attempted use out of the missiles than with the multi-laser turret or a multi-laser Sentinel. Commissar Lord in a bit of trouble here, in part because that was a call to boys, and all these shooter boys just spawned right in front of the Imperial Guard base, and that's just, again, Noisy putting on such incredible pressure right now with the Warboss. He held, like, Tex's natural power farm. It's also amazing how much Tex is suffering generator bashes, and, like, what is he going to be able to do about that? Like, with all the generator bashes he's suffering. Now, although he's pushed back in his base, he's actually got the double cap over here on that side with just both of these VPs that are fairly close together. But, I mean, man, and like, one of the things I say about the Warboss is that sometimes he's good, not necessarily just because of the damage he does personally, but because when you approach with the Warboss, you're distracting much of your opponent's army. Your opponent's army is trying to shoot at the Warboss, meaning they're not shooting at the Shooter Boys. And that allows the Shooter Boys to do their DPS relatively unanswered, and it really plays to the strengths of the Shooter Boys while kind of compensating for their weaknesses. So that's just a way that the Warboss really, really works well with the Shooter Boys. Now, Noisy has very interestingly chosen to get the spiky armor. I think that's a curious choice against Imperial Guard. Spiky armor is it's often thought of as a melee counter warrior because it returns damage to melee units that attack the Warboss. It's incredibly powerful against units like Banshees or Heretics, especially Slugger Boys. I would think it would be less useful against a predominantly ranged race like Imperial Guard, and Tex definitely has a strictly ranged build with Imperial Guard aside from his Commissar. But I think part of what Noisy's going for is just the increased health regeneration on the Warboss, just making the Warboss more tanky, and I guess that is a way to make the Warboss much, much more tanky before he can get to Tier 3. And Noisy, if we notice, he was actually somehow very far behind in tech. Despite it felt like Tex lost like 6 generators, Noisy, I didn't see him lose any, but he got to Tier 2 second. He just got to Tier 2. Tex has been in Tier 2 with missile launcher Sentinels. He's already got a Chimera out on the field. And Noisy still has a significant VP lead. He's been putting on a lot of pressure. I'd say one of the things that Noisy probably did was that he probably put his generators down very late. That's definitely something that Noisy tends to do, since he usually goes for those long builds. And one of the things he does is like, he will forego generators for a pretty long time when he's going for those long builds. And I'm saying this like he'll wait until he's got like 5 squads out before he even puts down a power node. Sometimes possibly even 6. Missile launchers going in. A pretty nice tool for bashing generators as well. Just any AV weapon is going to be good at bashing generators as well. Not as good as a flamer, but still good nonetheless. And he quickly loaded in the crack missiles, the AV missiles for that purpose. They are better than the frag missiles for bashing generators, although the frag missiles can still bash generators decently. Commissar Lord is kind of running around solo. He's going to run into these Shooter Boys. They can suppress him, but I think this would ultimately be a win for the Commissar. He can activate the energy shield. I actually feel like he should activate the energy shield. But he's also upgrading to the flak jacket, so maybe he wants to be able to use that post-engagement. He's going to use it right now. And it kind of bugged out. I don't know what happened there. Normally, that ability is pretty cool, just the way he slowly lines up that shot and then takes out a model. It can be a good retreat killing tool as well. Especially, it can be very good against things like tactical marines, when you just have a single tac model retreating and then suddenly you shoot out that huge burst damage ability. Now, about that orc range fire, that Commissar Flare, I would say, is probably a pretty crucial tool for dealing with that orc range fire. Just temporarily reducing the range of the Shooter Boys. That forces them to get closer, and generally, while they're moving in to try to get closer, they'll take a lot of range damage from the Guardsmen. And in this case, when the Shooter Boys stand still, they also take a lot of damage from the missile launcher Sentinels. That being said, it really feels like Tex has lost like 10 generators in this game. I don't know how much Noisy has lost in terms of his power. I know he lost the node, but I don't remember him losing any generators whatsoever. Anyway, Chimera's driving around. Are there any Guardsmen? Guardsmen are not even inside the Chimera, so it's a little also surprising to see Tex go for this build. To see Tex go, he has both double Sentinels and a Chimera. That's very hard to support with repairs because he's only got 2 Guardsmen. He's only got 2 repair units for 3 vehicles. Now he's even got the Chimera running around solo, bleeding models off of Shooter Boys. I wonder if he'll even take out the Shooter Boys. Why is he backing off? Oh, he backed off. I feel like that was a potential opportunity where he could have taken... Oh my god, that Slugger Boy. Just that one hit from that Slugger Knife took out a pretty nice chunk of that Sentinel's health and actually finished it off. So Tex loses a Sentinel, so he's not going to have that missile launcher. Now that the missile launcher is so good, and it's always been good, but now that it's as good as it is, I say it probably is a disadvantage, and just bad that he lost that Sentinel. It is going to help him as far as supporting the Chimera, because now he'll probably have a guardsman regularly in the Chimera to support it with repairs. He's also getting some Ogrins, which actually seems like a very curious choice to me right now. I think the Ogrins could potentially be very well controlled by triple shooter boys. They'll be very good at tanking the damage from the triple shooter boys, but they'll definitely be controlled by all the aiming what's that, because there are 3 squads that can use aiming what's that. I feel like Ogrins should constantly be suppressed, but we'll see what happens. So Tex managed to get a decap on Noisy's power node, but I don't know if he's going to be able to get that guardsman spot out of there alive. It's taking a lot of damage, even just from Orc ranged fire, and my god, look at it dying from ranged fire on retreat. It did lose something like 100 hit points in retreat from ranged fire, which is pretty amazing. We've got a Warchuck now out from Noisy. So now Tex only has 1 squad of guardsmen. Now, in spite of all that, Tex has managed to even out the VPs very, very nicely. Pretty amazingly, it's 229 to 221. He had started out this game with over a 200 VP deficit when Noisy still had 500, so he's done very, very well to get control back in that way. Ogrins are also going to take a lot of damage from the Warboss. He's stomping to knock them over. He also, again, he returns damage to them with every time they attack him. Now, the Ogrins don't get countered by that war gear, the spiky armor, as much as, say, Banshees would, but it's still not exactly a great situation for them. Ooh, missile launcher Sentinel goes in, shoots 1 missile hit. This war truck kind of really playing a dangerous game and needs repairs. You know, Noisy's he's got 1 squad of Slugger boys. He needs to get some repairs for that war truck, or it's going to go down. 1 more missile will finish it. And the Commissar is actually just running around. This game is actually pretty unbelievable. I don't even entirely know how Tex is winning, but he's managing to do it. And we had the Luda set up. I think maybe Noisy put this Luda right here because he knew that Tex was frequently patrolling this area with his Chimera. That being said, now the Chimera's over here. Guardsmen, the 1 squad of Guardsmen is not inside the Chimera. They're kind of running around behind it, which is kind of silly, but... now we also have some Storm Boys. Now Noisy has to be very, very careful because he's got all of these squads stepping on mines. He can't actually see them the way we can, but he's stepping on them, so he definitely knows that they're there. He has to be very careful about not driving his war truck on top of mines because it will probably die if it drives on top of those mines. He's being very careful. I'm actually a little surprised to see Tex drop all these mines, just not at any given time, just randomly. And it may not be that random, but I feel like with Noisy having triple shooter boys, only 2 of them have knob leaders for detection, but I would still think that like it would be pretty easy to detect the mines and then destroy them. Oh, but the Warchuck goes down there. Probably just another missile hit from that Sentinel. I would think that if Tex really wanted to use the mines very effectively, a great thing he could do would be to drop them down in the middle of an engagement and then detonate them with Sentinel missiles. I feel like that would be very, very powerful. And again, we have Tex just suffering huge generator bashes, but part of... I guess Noisy is... As much as he's being aggressive and getting these generator bashes, he's not getting the map control when he does this, and especially not getting the VPs. Well, he does kind of have map control, but he's not getting the VPs. He even has a VP right here that he could cap with one of these squads, but he hasn't. I think that's why he's sending the Warboss over here right now. Just realizing the VP pressure and realizing like his pushes, he's getting a lot of generators, but now he's actually running short on VPs. Ogrins are bashing generators themselves, but I feel like this farm has been up the whole game, and it's amazing they seem to be keeping pace in tech. Quite amazing. I mean, Noisy's not even that close to tier 3. He's wreck starved actually, which might be because he's losing a lot of models from all his Orc squads. He's got a lot of shooter boys, and they probably have been getting bled a lot by the missile launcher Sentinels. So maybe that's why he's the tech actually ends up being kind of even. And, I mean, in spite of everything, like, right now, just the positioning that Tex has with his units right now is very advantageous. This Warboss is not going to be able to do anything. The Orc units are starting to spread out so that they can take the map, and Noisy's going over here. The heavy weapon team will stop them for a little bit. Well, of course, the Storm Boys are designed to counter those kinds of squads, and they actually do stun them. And the heavy weapon team retreats out of there. Look at how much damage they took just in like 2 or 3 swings. Storm Boys really do a ton of damage. They do a huge amount of damage. And it's almost too powerful for a jump unit, except for the fact that they're so poor at chasing that it ends up being not that big of a deal. You just have to make sure you react to the Storm Boys, and then you will be pretty much okay. Anyway, Shooter Boys right here. I think they're using some Wah, as well as they're just both fully upgraded with their knobs, as well as the big shooters. They're going to do a lot of damage. They managed to not get suppressed by the heavy weapon team. I guess the heavy weapon team did not have a clear arc of fire before when they were back by the ramp. They are starting to suppress and damage the Shooter Boys on the point. Shooter Boys probably going to at least get a decap off, and I think after that they should go and probably will go. And yeah, and that's pretty much exactly what we see here. And in that case, Noisy just pretty wisely uses aiming what's that to suppress the Ogrins. That allows the Shooter Boys to just get out of there safely, not even with a single model loss. But anyway, we've got a Shooter Boy squad right here. I don't know if Noisy's paying attention yet, because that was a 2-model Shooter Boy squad that did not have a whole lot of health left. We might even see an Inspire Terror, which again bugged out for some reason. I don't know what's going on with that. That's really sad. Anyway, the Warboss has a Power Claw, so he's definitely going to be able to do a lot of damage to the Chimera if he can get in range. The heavy weapon team nearly got wiped, but managed to get in the Chimera just in time. And Ogren's now potentially in trouble. They lose 1 model. Can they make it 2? He actually backs off with the Slugger Boys, maybe because he didn't want to lose Slugger models. But I wonder if that Warboss now, he's already outside of the range of those Ogrins, so he's not going to be able to get any more models. Definitely don't want to reinforce too many Ogre models. They are quite tough, but Tex is now actually looking like, against all odds, I mean, it's interesting because they're both in tier 2, but Tex doesn't have much power income, but he's got plenty of wreck. So, I mean, I guess I'd say what has maybe been going on is that with the way the engagements have going, Noisy has probably just been bleeding a lot more requisition, and that's part of what's been keeping his requisition in check. But at the same time, I mean, Tex spent about 1,000 requisition on generators that ultimately got destroyed by Noisy. And Tex doesn't really have that much power, but Noisy doesn't really have enough requisition to go along with his power. Although at this point it looks like he's still going to be a bit ahead. He was going to tier 3, then he canceled that. Or at least he has enough resources to go to tier 3. I don't know, did he actually go to tier 3? Or was that just a magic case? He definitely has the resources to go to tier 3 in any case. Tex clearly doesn't and probably won't in the course of this game. I don't think we'll even see that. Commissar still pretty much clearly loses to the Warboss, especially the Commissar with no upgraded weapon. Maybe he can get a Power Claw of his own and they can clash claws. Anyway, Warboss right here. I think we'll get out of there alive. Well, I thought the Ogrins were going to continue chasing to take out the Warboss, and I thought maybe they could have gotten the wipe, but I think some aiming what's that should have been there to save them, but it ended up not being necessary. And we've got a Pain Boy right here who's actually in quite a bit of trouble. He's got, like, not a whole lot of health left, but he actually managed to get out of there. I think he used that unstable fuel injection ability, which you don't see a lot on the Storm Boys. That unstable fuel injection ability basically detonates a model, which does knockback. It's kind of like a Doom Blast for Orc squads, except it's tied to the Pain Boy, and you do it on a squad of your choice. Oh my god. Wow, that time the Flak Jacket and Inspire Terror did not bug out, and that squad of Storm Boys got destroyed horribly. We've actually still got a Sentinel here for Tex, and it's level 4, so those missiles are probably pretty beastly at this point. Tex, meanwhile, he's actually still got the lead VPs, yeah. Noisy took back the VPs a little bit, and we should see some suppression from this heavy weapon team as a way to control these Slugger Boys. Didn't even really move the guardsmen out of there, but I think those Sluggers were just taking too much damage from the heavy weapon team at close range. One Ogre model goes down, not just any Ogre model as well. That was the Bonehead leader. That's going to cost quite a bit more to reinforce. Tex has a Manticore. The first Manticore strike is going in, hits Noisy nice and hard, took out about 6 models in total, but Tex also doesn't quite pay attention to his Commissar Lord going down. The Manticore, I feel, is such a good unit, and there are definitely Imperial Guard players say that sometimes they don't get in 1v1 because they need like an actual fighting unit as opposed to this behind-the-lines artillery unit, and I get that. And I'd say the situation that Tex got the Manticore in is probably one of the more practical situations to get a Manticore in 1v1. And what that is that he hasn't gone to Tier 3, so instead of using those resources to go to Tier 3, he's using those resources to get a Manticore. And he's getting that Manticore very late, after he's been in Tier 2 for quite a while and has already invested in a lot of Tier 3 things, Tier 2 things, and Tier 2 things that actually can fight. You know, when I say actually can fight, I mean things like the Chimera, the Ogrins, things that are real frontline fighting units. I mean, well, arguably the Chimera is not exactly a frontline fighting unit, but still more of a main combat vehicle than a Manticore, which you just don't want at the front lines. Now, that Sentinel went down. I don't know if Tex just gave it up. I think more likely he probably just got it surrounded and he couldn't move it out of there, and there was nothing he could do about that. Chimera is still alive as well. Needs some repairs. Looks like the Ogrins are capping. Commissar Lord, oh no. I feel like I generally think it's better to activate the energy shield first and then take damage from the energy shield, because then if you have to retreat, you still have your health left to absorb damage on retreat, as opposed to the energy shield, which does not work on retreat. So I'd say absorb damage with the energy shield first when you're not in retreat. Oh, and man, that Chimera still had something like 20% health left, but just a big swing from the Warboss actually finished it off. Meanwhile, these Storm Boys, this is Tex's second squad of not Texas, Noisy's second squad of Storm Boys, and it nearly got wiped as well. Only has the Storm Boy Knob left. It's now a 1-to-1 count. The VPs are very even. Pretty amazing considering the way this game has gone. Noisy with that early over 200-point VP lead, bashed like 10 generators, and Tex is just still here. He's now getting another heavy weapon team. So the Chimera's gone, a Warboss, and I mean, he's still just pushing right into base. Switching to the Cyborg implants, which, well, it's not terribly surprising. That would actually be very good at dealing with the Ogrins. But, alright, Noisy about to get the double cap again. I mean, well, except for the fact that Tex is actually back capping with one of his heavy weapons teams. He's got 3 heavy weapons teams, and all 3 of them are just heavy bolter weapons teams. But I mean, that might just be in response to the Warboss. And I mean, look at the Warboss exerting all this pressure by himself right in front of the Imperial Guard base. That's just part of what the Warboss does, and part of what I think makes him a good hero. And it's personally not really my style of play, like exerting that kind of pressure with like a really big tanky single entity.
So we're losing a victory point out there.
But I mean, that's just what he does, and he's really good at it. Anyway, it's a double cap for Tex. Actually, it won't last too long. Only a single cap for Tex, but it's a 1-to-0. Storm Boys are coming in. I think the combination of the Ogrins using their Bonehead Charge should be enough to overwhelm the Storm Boys. Storm Boys actually do use use your chopper, so that might give them the edge with power melee damage, as well as the damage bonus and potential knockdowns. But actually, it's now the Ogrins who get the advantage by using their Bonehead Charge to knock over all these Storm Boys, and the Storm Boys are just straight up losing that fight. They were also hit by Inspire Terror from the Commissar Lord, probably instantly killed a model and also debuffed them. The Pain Boy staying in here way too long, probably going to get wiped. Noisy must have just forgotten about him, and he's just getting knocked down multiple times, and the Pain Boy is dead. I feel like very unnecessarily, but Noisy might just be focused elsewhere. We've even got Guardsmen. They get a decap, and it's still a single cap for Tex, and 67 to 31.
A victory point
Warboss
is
decides
slipping
to... Is he starting to capture the point? It looks like his icon's missing, but it shows that Tex's point is getting decapped.
progress.
And Tex actually loses his last squad of guardsmen trying to capture that point. I don't know if he just forgot about them or just got desperate, but
Message received.
loses his last squad of guardsmen. These Slugger Boys, unfortunately, are just not going to make it forward. If anything, I think they should stay back and then just prevent a unit from capturing the point. Instead, they're walking right into the mines, walking right into the heavy bolter file, and the Sluggers even get wiped. Noisy really dropping things in this, like, just at the end of this game, quite amazingly. Just surprising to see that from a player of his caliber, but I don't know. Anything could happen. He might just be desperate. He might not care. He might actually be overtaxed. And we have a new Pain Boy. That's a little strange, but you know, we got a new Pain Boy. So now the Storm Boys jump in because they can of course jump in, but we have overlapping firing arcs on the heavy weapon team, and it looks like this heavy weapon team also trying to set up again to continue to control the Storm Boys, and they're not going to have enough energy for another jump. It looks like, and Tex is going to move that second heavy weapon team out of there, and despite the health, Tex tries to, or Noisy tries to, like, I guess maybe kill it with Bomber Boys, but doesn't end up doing it, and he's actually calling a GG. It's 48 to 9, and Noisy concedes, and that's the end of the game. Pretty unbelievable. With, like, it feels like these were Noisy's generators all game. Tex meanwhile lost like at least 10 generators. Both players never went to tier 3. But of course, either way, great game, some high level players. Hope you enjoyed the cast. Have a good night.